Hi developers, in this video we'll learn how to create the CI and CD pipeline for an Angular application. For that we'll be using Visual Studio Team Services and Docker containers. For the CI or the build pipeline, we'll be using a Docker container in order to build our Angular application. Then we'll publish that image into Docker Hub. Once Docker Hub gets that image, it will notify the release pipeline or the CD pipeline, which will get that image, then deploy it to a web app on Azure. Let's start by creating an Angular application. We can do that either through the terminal or the CMD window, but here I'm inside Visual Studio Code. For that, I'll do it from the integrated terminal. From here, you can use the command ng new, then the name of my application. Here I call it Angular-app. This command will create an application. So if we go and open that folder, we call it Angular-app, then here we find all the files for our Angular application using TypeScript. We can see that here we have the source folder and all the required files to run an Angular application. Let's open again the integrated terminal, and here let's run our application using the command ng serve-o in order to open the application and run it inside the browser. The application here will be started at the localhost for 4200, this port, and here is our simple empty Angular application. So we have run the Angular application on my local machine because I have Node.js and Angular environment installed on my machine, but I want to do the same thing using Docker containers. Here I have Docker installed on my machine. If you didn't already install it, you can go to docker.com and install it on your Windows, Mac or Linux machine. To run a Docker container, Docker platform relies on configuration files. Those are called simply Docker file. So let's create one right here. We'll call it Docker file. The Docker file contains all the configuration and all the commands required to build and run an Angular application inside the container. Think about the commands for ng serve and ng build and so on. Here I'll go and copy and paste a sample Docker file content, which you can find it later inside my GitHub account. So here I'll use VS Code snippets in order to paste it here instead of typing it. And here we see that we have two stages. Let's start by the first stage, where we have the command from node latest. What is this? So this is a Docker image which is available on Docker Hub, where we can find lots of Docker images. Each one is built to support either a language or a database engine or whatever. Here we will be using an image for Node. The second step is setting the working directory to the app folder. Then we'll copy the current content of our Angular application to the current Docker folder. So the current content is this one. We are seeing it in our VS Code. We'll go and copy it to the current folder and the image, which is the app folder. Then we'll go and run the command npm install in order to install the Angular dependencies and retrieve all the npm packages. Then we'll go and run npm run build --prod. This one will generate the dist folder, which contains the files that needs to be published in order to publish an Angular app on a web application. What we have done in stage 1 is that we have used the node image in order to build and generate an Angular application. But until now, our Angular application, which lives inside the dist folder, is inside our node image. But to run the application, we'll need to use another more optimized image, which is the nginx image, available also on Docker Hub. So for stage 2, we'll be copying the content of the Angular application from the node image to the nginx image. For that, we are here using the command copy, which will copy from the node image. Node here is the alias for the stage 1, which refers to the node image. So we'll copy the dist folder from the first image to the second image. Here we have two parameters to specify. The first parameter is the path to the first folder. Here we are using the app as the working directory. Then we are using the dist folder. As we said, the Angular deployment files will be inside the dist folder. Then we'll copy it to the current folder, or to a specified folder for inside the nginx image. That one is the user share nginx/html. Here I added your app name after the dist folder for the first image, because here we do have some small changes inside Angular applications. Typically, Angular application before the version 6, they use it to copy the deployment files inside the dist folder, but here you see it added another folder called Angular app using the same name of my app inside the dist folder, and it placed all the files inside that added folder instead of copying them directly inside the dist folder. For that, I added your app name. That's actually configurable, so you can go to the angular.json, and from here for the output path you can it's by default using dist / the name of my app. If you want, you can just remove it and use the traditional way using the dist folder. But here I'll keep it as default, and I'll change my command here to use the name of my folder inside the dist folder, which is here the angular-app. Now that we have configured the Docker file, now we can run this Docker file in order to generate and run the Angular application. So to generate the image, we'll use the command docker build. Docker build comes with some parameters. If you don't know those parameters, then don't worry, because VS Code have a really good feature right here which will help you to generate the command needed to build the Docker file. We can use that through the command palette, through right click, and here you see you can see all the Docker commands available. Here I'm looking for the command to build an image. For that, I'll choose here docker build image, but you see also other commands for running, push, compose, and so on. We'll use the docker build command. That command needs to know which Docker file I want to run. Here it detects that in my application, in my folder, I have already a Docker file because in some specific cases we might have multiple Docker files. So it will detect all your Docker files and ask you which one you want to use. Then another parameter is the image, or the name of the image you want to tag. Here I want to tag my image as angular-app.latest. It's the name it uses by default, which takes the name of my application. I click enter, and then here you see it generated the command. So now it have docker build with all the configuration and all the parameters needed to run the docker build command. The docker build command will run all the commands inside the docker file. So here it will start by the first command, which will pull down or will download the node image. If it's not already downloaded, then we'll set the working directory to a /app folder, then go and copy the current files inside the /app folder inside the image. Then it will run npm install npm build, and here it is generating the files inside the dist folder. Then it will go to the second stage to use the nginx of image, and it will download it. If it's not available, then it will copy the content from the first image to the second one, and then tag the image as angular app latest. I've used the Docker build in order to generate the Docker container. Now we need to run that container. For that, I'll use again the command palette in order to generate the Docker run command. For that, I'll search for that command right here. So Docker run, I selected, and here it asks me for the first parameter, the name of the Docker container I want to run. So I'll select the one I have already generated, angular-app latest. I select that one that will create the following command: docker run --rm, then -d to run it on daemon mode, then map the port 80 to the port 80 inside my machine, and then use the image angular-app latest. So now my Docker container is running, and I can see it inside my localhost on the port 80. So if I open my browser to the port 80, I can see here my Angular application running inside a Docker container. We have built and run the Docker container inside our local machine, but we want to automate this process in VSTS using the CI and CD. So let's start by getting the source code inside GitHub. Here I'll go to GitHub, create a new project, call it a demo Angular app, then create the repository. And here I'll use those git commands inside my VS Code in order to add the source code and push it to the GitHub repository. So I'll use the command git init, git add, git commit, and git push to push the source code to GitHub. So here, if I refresh my code GitHub repository, I can find my local Angular application now hosted on GitHub repo. Now I move to VSTS, Visual Studio Team Services, in order to start creating my CI and CD pipelines. Here I'll go and create a new project. I call it Demo Angular App, then create that project. And then we'll go to build and release, and we'll go first to create the build, then we'll move to the release. We go to create a new definition for the build. And here the first step is to select the source for our source code. Here we are using GitHub, so I select GitHub. Then here I need to authorize VSTS in order to call the GitHub API in order to get notified whenever a new commit is created on GitHub, so that using the webhooks, GitHub can notify VSTS that he have a new commit, so that VSTS can use that as a trigger to run the CI and CD pipelines. Then we need to configure the repository, as now we have access to all the repo in my GitHub account. So I look for the repo that I have already created. I called it a demo Angular app. I selected. Then here I can choose another branch if I have already, but here I only have master, so I'll be fine with that. Then we move here to select the template, and here you see we have support for multiple languages and the platforms to build and run multiple applications. Here I'll look for Docker. So I compose here Docker for the search. Then I have here Docker container. I'll apply it. This will add two tasks to this process, one for build the image and second one for push the image. So let's start by configuring the process, and here it asks for which image we want to, or which agent we want to use. Here it's selected hosted Linux preview. That's what we use typically with Docker containers, but we can also select the hosted VS 2017, which is using a Windows image. Then we'll go to select the sources, and here again we'll use a Docker or a GitHub with the name of our repository, demo/Angular app. We select it. Then we'll go to configure the phase 1, which contains the two tasks for building and pushing the image. Let's start by the first task, building the image. To build the image, here we need to specify what we are using. Are we using Docker Hub or the Azure Container Registry? We are using Docker Hub, so we use container registry. Then we move to the second parameter here, the Docker registry connection, because my VSTS right here needs to connect to that Docker Hub repository in order to push the image. For that, we need to create that connection and let Docker Hub trust VSTS. So clicking the new here, I specify that I want to connect to Docker Hub. So I'll specify connection name. Let's call it Docker Hub connection. You can use whatever name you want. And here I'll put my Docker ID and the password for my Docker Hub account. Here I already created a Docker Hub account, and make sure here you use the right Docker ID, which is specified on your URL or at the top right corner of your Docker Hub account. Then we have the password. We can verify the connection. It's verifying and it tells me that everything is working good. I click OK and come back to the pipeline here, where for the third step is specifying the action. Here by default it says build an image, but we have some other commands we can run. So we have for tag push, and here we are specifying building the image. As we want to create the image, then we'll push it to Docker Hub. Then the Docker file, here we are actually VSTS will look for anything in my source code that have the name Docker file. So it will look inside all the folders looking for the Docker file that we have created. Make sure here you write Docker file with uppercase D. If you write it with lowercase d, then you need to respect that naming convention. Here I use it the uppercase, so everything is fine. Then we move to other parameters. Here the image name, what we want to call our image. Here by default VSTS uses the name of the repository. This will take the name of my repository on GitHub, and this is gonna be the name of my GitHub repository. As we'll see here, it will take actually this value, the name of my GitHub account / the name of the repository. And that's not the good value, so I want to use another name for my Docker Hub image. So I'll use the name of my Docker Hub account. So let's copy it. Then let's use it right here. So let's use Docker Hussam Docker. Then dash the name of my image. I want to call my image demo Angular. Then we can specify the tag. Here by default VSTS uses the build.build ID, which is a number which will be incremented in each time VSTS creates a new build. I'm fine with that, so I leave it as default. Then we move to the second task, which is pushing the image that was created at the first task. So push image will take the image and try to push it to a Docker Hub. For that, here we are using the connection to our Docker Hub account that we specified in the first task. Then we need to specify the Docker, here actually we are configuring the Docker registry connection, the connection that we have created, in order to be able to communicate with Docker Hub to push the image. We'll use the action push an image. Then here we need to specify the same image name that we have used in the first task. So let's copy that value from the first task, the name of my Docker Hub ID, then dash the name of my image, then the tag. I'll copy it right here. That was all the required steps in order to build and push a Docker container for our Angular application to Docker Hub. It was simple. Now to run this CI pipeline, we'll go to save and queue. Then from here we can select our hosted VS 2017, then click save, and that will trigger the running the CI pipeline, which will run the build and the push tasks. Let's go and open the console from this link right here to see all the steps from the console window or from the logs. So here it starts by initializing the agent. This will provision an agent. It will get the source code for our application from GitHub. For that, it uses the commands git clone and so on. Then it will run the task for building the image, which will generate the image with the parameters we have specified, like the image name and the tag. But here I actually have made a mistake. That was the choice of my agent queue. I choose it hosted VS 2017, but that agent doesn't contain all the dependencies needed to build Docker containers. It doesn't have Docker installed. So you can use hosted Linux, or you can create your own private agents, as I have created right here. I have a video on how to do that. So for me, I'll choose my macOS private agent, but you can use Linux one. So let's try to build again that our pipeline. Let's open the new link and let's see the steps running in the console window. So it gets the source code from GitHub, builds the image. And here we see all the steps running. So we see step 1 from 7, which will download the node image. If it's not already downloaded, then it will use the working directory. It will set it up to our app folder. And once that's finished, here, make sure we have built an image and push an image executed successfully. We can go here to our Docker Hub account, refresh, and we should see a new repository that added. That was the repository that we have created from VSTS. If we go to that repo, to the tags, we see that we have the tag here 585. It comes from where? That comes from the build ID that we talked about. We said that was an incrementing number for each build. We have published the Docker container image to Docker Hub so that we can use it from our CD pipeline. To create the CD pipeline, I'll go to build and release, select release. Then here we'll get lots of templates. If I select new definition, so we'll get lots of templates which their goal is to deploy either to a web app or to a Node.js app, PHP, or whatever app you choose. I select the first one and I start by configuring the artifact. So the artifact is from where we'll get the deployable packages or the Docker container image. So we can get it from the build if we store that Docker image inside the drop folder, inside the agent we use it for the build. But we have some other options, including here Docker Hub. So I select Docker Hub because my image is already in Docker Hub. Selecting Docker Hub, then I select here the service endpoint, the connection that we have created during the build phase. So I'll use that to authenticate to Docker Hub so that it allows me to pull down the image that I have published. Then we select the namespace, my Docker Hub ID. Then we select the repository from which I want to get my Docker Hub image. Make sure here you select the right repository. Here I used the one called /demo-angular. So I need to select that right one, demo-angular. Now click add and let's move to the environment one, the phase. So here, so that we get the Docker container. Now we want to publish it to an Azure web app. For that, I need to select my Azure subscription, and then we need to authorize so that Azure can trust VSTS, so that VSTS can send the container, the Docker container, and publish it into, here we'll choose the Linux app, because containers, they need to go to a Linux app inside Azure, inside Microsoft Azure. The app service name, here I don't have any, so I need to create a web app for containers inside Azure. From the Azure portal, I go and create a new resource. We select web, then here we select the web app for containers. That's the right template for deploying Docker containers. I need to specify an app name. That's gonna be the domain name for my app. I select demo angular 1, then click create. It's that simple. Here we have the choices between Docker Hub or Azure Container Registry, ICR. Here I continue with Docker Hub with my public repository. Here it asks for the image and the tag. I specify the image starting from my Docker Hub ID. So we need to specify that Docker Hub ID, then slash or the name of the repository, which is in my case here demo-angular. The tag is optional. So I'll keep it empty, so that in this case it will look for the image with the tag latest. Click create, then create again, and that will provision a web app for containers inside my Azure subscription. Once that's created, now I go to that subscription, and from VSTS I'll refresh the web apps that I have created, and here I can see the web app for containers and select it. I won't change the image source, but here I'll change the registry or namespace value here to use the repository that I have created, demo-angular. Now we go to run the release. For that I go to release, and here we to manually run this release, I need to choose which build will be related to this release. So I select the latest build with the build ID 585. Here it won't take anything from that build, but it's required by VSTS to get that number. We click create, then we'll open this link which will display the log window. Here it tells us that it's queued because it is waiting for an available agent. Once it gets that agent, let's run our web app for containers right now, and here it tells us that the service was unavailable, but this should change now because we'll be pushing our Docker container from Docker Hub. The CI pipeline runs successfully. So now if I go to my website, refresh, then here I should see my Angular app on Azure website running inside a container. Let's make this demo even more interesting. Until now we have manually run the CI and CD pipelines by clicking the release or the queue and save queue buttons inside the build pipeline. Now what I want to do is to trigger the build and the release automatically in each time I have a new commit on GitHub. So GitHub will notify VSTS that it have a new version of the code which will trigger the build and release. How can we trigger those build and release automatically? For the build, we can go to the triggers window, and here we have this check button that says enable continuous integration. We'll check it, and we only need to save that change. Let's save it. Now VSTS will be listening for any notifications coming from GitHub in order to trigger the build pipeline. Let's now do the same for our release pipeline so that when the build finishes, the release starts. For that, I'll go to the window where I have defined my release pipeline. Here it's a bit different. We don't have a triggers menu, but if I go back to the pipeline, actually here we have this icon that says continuous deployment trigger. I click on it, and here it deploys or it shows this switch saying continuous deployment trigger enabled. Let's enable it. Then we save those changes, and now we have setup, continuous integration, and continuous deployment. So let's try if that works fine. So I go back to my VS Code and make some change in the source file. Here I go to index.html and try to change the text displaying here the first text in my Angular app saying welcome to app. Here I'll add parentheses saying CI/CD. Now I'll go and do git add, git commit, then git push to push those changes into GitHub. Make sure that they were added to GitHub, and that should now trigger or actually GitHub should send a notification to VSTS saying it have a new version of the code. So VSTS should trigger the build pipeline, and here that's what's happening. We have the build in progress. Let's open that window to see the logs, and here we see the build pipeline triggered automatically by GitHub. Here it is executing all the tasks for building and pushing the image. Once that finishes, now when we go to the release pipeline, we open all the window displaying all the releases, and we should see a release in progress. That's our release. We click on it, and we see here it is running. It is looking for an agent, and it was triggered by the build pipeline. So the release will the build will deploy a new Docker image or Docker container into a Docker hub. Here we see a new tag 586 published a minute ago. The release pipeline will get that image, that Docker container, and deploy it to our web app on Azure, which previously displays this text. Now we should, when we refresh, we should see the new text displayed right here. Let's refresh, and here we see the new text added and displayed automatically.